The signal arrived on a Tuesday morning at 00:0347 hours, crackling through the deep space monitoring arrays scattered across Earth's orbital platforms. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was 3 hours into her night shift at the Titan Deep Space Communications Center when the computers began screaming alerts that would change everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. The transmission was weak, barely above background radiation, but unmistakably artificial. More importantly, it was unmistakably desperate. Sarah's hands trembled as she isolated the signal and began running it through the translation protocols. The patterns were mathematical at first, prime numbers and basic equations, but then something else emerged from the static. Language. Alien language, but structured in a way that suggested intelligence, fear, and urgent need. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth had copies of the transmission. The message, once decoded by the combined efforts of humanity's greatest linguistic minds, was simple and terrifying. We are dying. The devourers have found us. 27 worlds have fallen. If anyone receives this, please. We cannot stand alone. Coordinates follow. We are the last. The coordinates pointed to a star system 847 light-years from Earth in the constellation Cygnus. For most civilizations, such a distance would be insurmountable. But humanity had something that made them unique in the galaxy. They had never learned when to quit. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood before the United Earth Defense Council 3 weeks later, his weathered face grim as he outlined humanity's response. Behind him, holographic displays showed the most ambitious military operation in human history. Ladies and gentlemen, we've spent the last century preparing for the day we might encounter hostile alien life. We never imagined our first contact would be answering someone else's call for help. The plan was audacious beyond measure. Humanity would mobilize every military vessel capable of faster-than-light travel. The recently completed dreadnought Terra's Wrath would lead a fleet of 300 ships, carrying everything from marines to scientists, weapons to medical supplies. They would jump across nearly 1,000 light-years into unknown space, potentially facing an enemy that had already destroyed 27 worlds. Captain Elena Vasquez received her orders while overseeing combat drills aboard the assault carrier New Tokyo. She was told to prepare her ship and crew for extended combat operations against unknown hostiles. What she wasn't told was that their enemy had never encountered anything like human warfare. The first clue that humans were different came from their manufacturing capacity. While the surviving aliens had sent their distress call and then waited for inevitable doom, humanity had spent the 3 weeks since receiving the message in a frenzy of military production. Shipyards that usually built 1 vessel per month were launching 1 per day. Weapons factories worked around the clock. Recruitment centers saw lines stretching for miles as civilians volunteered for what was being called the Great Expedition. Dr. James Park, xenobiologist and hastily appointed alien relations specialist, studied the cultural data embedded in the distress signal during the long journey to the Cygnus system. What he found both amazed and concerned him. The aliens, who called themselves the Veltar, were an ancient species, far older than humanity. They possessed technology that made Earth's greatest achievements look primitive. Their ships were powered by controlled black holes. Their weapons could crack planets. Their knowledge of the universe spanned millions of years. Yet they were losing. The enemy they faced, known as the Devourers, were described as relentless consumers of worlds. They stripped planets of all resources, including their inhabitants, leaving nothing but dead rock behind. The Veltar had fought them for 3 centuries using traditional warfare. Massive ships engaging in grand battles across the void of space. They had lost every single engagement. What the Veltar didn't understand was that humans had learned warfare in a much harsher school. Earth's history was written in blood, with every advancement in civilization shadowed by new ways to kill. Humans had fought each other in trenches filled with poison gas, in cities reduced to rubble, in jungles where death waited behind every tree. They had learned to fight dirty, to be unpredictable, to never surrender even when facing impossible odds. Commander Lisa Chen, Sarah's older sister and leader of the expedition's special forces, spent the journey studying everything known about the Devourers. Their tactics were apparently straightforward, overwhelmed with superior numbers and technology. They had never faced an opponent that specialized in asymmetric warfare. They had never fought anyone who considered being outnumbered a challenge rather than a death sentence. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Veltar home system to find exactly what the distress signal had promised, a dying civilization. 3 massive space stations orbited a blue-green world, all showing signs of heavy damage. Debris fields marked the graves of fallen Veltar warships. In the distance, a dark fleet of geometric black vessels slowly approached the planet like a plague of locusts. Admiral Rodriguez opened communications with the Veltar leadership. The alien voice that responded carried centuries of weariness and the weight of inevitable defeat. Unknown vessels, identify yourselves. If you have come to help, you are too late. Our last defenses will fall within days. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force, came the reply that would echo through galactic history. We received your distress call. We're here to help. There was a long pause before the Veltar responded, and when they did, their voice carried something that had been missing for far too long. Hope. Earth? The young species from the outer spiral? But you are so far away. How did you— We came as fast as we could, Rodriguez said simply. Now let's talk about how we're going to kill these Devourers. What followed was the first of many conversations that would fundamentally change how galactic warfare was conducted. The Veltar shared their technological superiority, shields that could withstand star-level energy, weapons that bent space-time itself, sensors that could detect movement across entire solar systems. Humanity shared something far more dangerous, 3 centuries of experience in making the impossible possible through sheer bloody-minded determination. The Veltar had been fighting a defensive war, trying to protect their worlds with massive fleets and technological superiority. The Devourers had simply built bigger fleets and better technology. It was a losing game that could only end one way. Humans took one look at the strategic situation and asked a question that had never occurred to the Veltar. Why are we fighting them where they're strong? Let's fight them where they're weak. Captain Vasquez found herself in command of the first joint human-Veltar strike force, a mixture of human tactical thinking and alien technology that neither species could have imagined alone. Her mission was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Instead of meeting the Devourer fleet in open battle, they would slip past them entirely and attack the enemy's supply lines. The Devourers, it turned out, had never considered that someone might ignore their main fleet. They had grown complacent through centuries of easy victories. Their rear areas were defended by automated systems and minimal crews, designed to handle the occasional desperate survivor, not a coordinated military assault by an entirely new species that specialized in finding and exploiting weakness. As the human fleet prepared for their first strike, Admiral Rodriguez looked out at the stars and thought about the signal that had started it all. Some alien civilization, dying and desperate, had sent out a call for help to the universe. They had no way of knowing who might answer, or if anyone would answer at all. They certainly hadn't expected that the answer would come in the form of 300 ships, crewed by beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to fight against impossible odds. The Devourers had conquered 27 worlds by being stronger, faster, and more advanced than anyone they faced. They had never fought humans. The first human strike hit the Devourer supply convoy 48 hours after their arrival in the Veltar system. Captain Vasquez led 12 human destroyers and 6 Veltar reconnaissance ships against what should have been an impossible target, a massive logistics fleet protected by ships each the size of Earth's moon. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. Commander Lisa Chen's Marines used a tactic that had been refined in the brutal urban warfare of Earth's history. They didn't try to destroy the massive Devourer ships. Instead, they boarded them. Using Veltar transport technology combined with human breaching techniques, the strike teams materialized inside the enemy vessels and systematically dismantled their critical systems from within. The Devourers had never encountered boarding actions. Their ships were designed to fight at ranges measured in millions of kilometers, trading devastating energy blasts with equally massive opponents. The idea that enemy soldiers could simply appear inside their vessels, fighting corridor to corridor with personal weapons, was so foreign to their experience that their automated defense systems had no protocols to handle it. Dr. Park, monitoring the assault from the human flagship, watched in fascination as the first live Devourers were captured. They were insectoid creatures, roughly humanoid but covered in chitinous armor that interfaced directly with their technology. What shocked him was how completely unprepared they were for close-quarters combat. These beings had spent centuries conquering worlds using massive fleets and overwhelming firepower. They had forgotten, if they ever knew, how to fight as individuals. Humans, on the other hand, had never forgotten. Sergeant Maria Santos, leading Alpha Squad through the corridors of a Devourer command ship, found herself face-to-face with the enemy for the first time. The creatures were larger than humans, with 4 arms and compound eyes that tracked movement with unsettling precision. Their weapons were energy-based, designed for shipboard combat at long range. But when Santos and her squad opened fire with their projectile weapons in the narrow confines of the ship's corridors, the Devourers discovered a fundamental truth about human warfare. Sometimes the oldest tools were the best tools. The projectile weapons tore through the Devourers' armor like paper. Their energy shields, designed to stop massive beam weapons, were useless against simple bullets traveling at hypersonic speeds. Within minutes, Santos's squad had secured the command center of a ship that could have destroyed a planet. Admiral Rodriguez watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction as the supply convoy was systematically captured or destroyed. But this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the main Devourer fleet realized what was happening and turned to face this new threat. The Veltar commander, Admiral Kethvar, struggled to understand what he was seeing. His species had fought the Devourers for 3 centuries, using every advanced tactic known to galactic civilization. They had tried energy warfare, gravitational weapons, dimensional manipulation, and exotic matter deployment. All had failed, yet these primitive humans were achieving victory after victory, using what appeared to be barely controlled chaos. How do they coordinate such complex operations with such primitive communication systems? Kethvar asked Dr. Park during a joint strategy session. Park smiled, remembering every war movie he'd ever watched, every military history book he'd studied. They don't coordinate, Admiral. They improvise. Every human soldier is trained to think for themselves, to adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders. When their original plan fails, they make a new plan. When that fails, they make another. They keep fighting until they win or until there's nothing left to fight with. This improvisation was on full display during the Battle of the Outer Moons, 48 hours after the first supply convoy attack. The Devourers had finally responded to the human presence by sending a detachment of their main fleet to hunt down these new enemies. 50 massive warships, each the size of Manhattan, advanced on the last known human positions. They found nothing. Captain Vasquez had taken her mixed human Veltar fleet and vanished into the asteroid field that ringed the system. Using Veltar cloaking technology combined with human expertise in guerrilla warfare, they had become ghosts among the rocks. When the Devourer hunting fleet entered the asteroid field, they found themselves fighting an enemy that struck from ambush and then disappeared, only to strike again from an entirely different direction. The Devourers tried to adapt. They sent smaller ships into the asteroids while keeping their larger vessels in open space where their superior firepower could be brought to bear. It was exactly what Captain Vasquez had hoped they would do. The smaller ships were picked off one by human boarding parties, while the larger ships found themselves unable to use their massive weapons without destroying the very asteroids their smaller ships were hiding behind. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, who had detected the original distress signal, now found herself commanding a Veltar stealth ship that had been retrofitted with human weapons. Her mission was intelligence gathering, but when she detected a Devourer command ship attempting to coordinate the hunt, she made a decision that would have horrified her superiors and delighted her Marine sister. She attacked. The stealth ship materialized inside the Devourer formation and began transmitting on every frequency the human fleet was monitoring. But instead of requesting backup or reporting tactical information, Sarah began broadcasting a running commentary of her attack, describing every Devourer weakness she observed, every successful tactic, every opportunity for other ships to exploit. Within minutes, every human ship in the asteroid field was receiving real-time intelligence from someone actually fighting inside the enemy formation. The Devourers found themselves facing an opponent that learned and adapted faster than their tactical computers could process. But the real shock came when the Devourer main fleet finally arrived to reinforce their hunting detachment. Admiral Rodriguez had been waiting for this moment. As the massive alien fleet approached the asteroid field, they detected what appeared to be the entire human force. Over 200 ships in perfect formation, advancing to meet them in open battle. The Devourers deployed for conventional warfare, the kind they had used to destroy 27 civilizations. Their ships formed a battle line, stretching across millions of kilometers, weapons charged and ready to deliver the decisive blow that would end this irritating human resistance. The human ships continued their advance, never changing course, never breaking formation. It looked like suicide. The Devourers prepared to add humanity to their list of conquered species. Then the human ships opened fire. But the weapons that struck the Devourer fleet weren't the primitive projectile weapons they had encountered in the supply convoy attacks. These were Veltar energy weapons, powered by human fusion reactors and fired with human targeting systems that had been refined through centuries of warfare. The combination was devastating. More importantly, the human ships didn't stop after firing. Instead of the traditional exchange of long-range bombardment that characterized galactic warfare, the human fleet accelerated toward the enemy line, continuing to fire as they closed the distance. It was a tactic so ancient that the Devourers had no reference for it in their tactical databases. It was called a charge. Admiral Kethvar, monitoring the battle from his command ship, watched in amazement as the human fleet smashed into the Devourer line like a hammer blow. But what happened next defied everything he thought he knew about space combat. Instead of maintaining formation and trading fire at close range, the human ships scattered in all directions, each one following its own tactical plan, creating a three-dimensional battlefield that moved too fast for the Devourer command systems to track. Dr. Park, studying the battle data in real time, finally understood what made humans unique. Every other species in the galaxy had developed space combat as an extension of their planet-bound warfare. The Veltar fought like medieval knights, with honor and formation and grand strategy. The Devourers fought like a swarm of insects, overwhelming opposition with numbers and coordination. Humans fought like humans. They used every dirty trick, every unexpected tactic, every piece of environmental terrain to their advantage. They treated the three-dimensional battlefield of space like the urban warfare of Earth's cities, the jungle fighting of Earth's wars, the trench warfare of Earth's bloodiest conflicts. They made it personal. Commander Lisa Chen found herself leading a boarding assault against the Devourer flagship, a ship so massive it had its own gravity field. Her Marines had trained for this moment, using every lesson learned from the brutal house-to-house fighting of Earth's history. They moved through the ship like a virus through a body, small and fast and utterly lethal. The Devourer crew had never experienced anything like it. They were used to combat that happened at the speed of thought, mediated by computers and fought at astronomical distances. The idea of enemies running through their corridors, shooting their officers, and planting explosives on their critical systems was so primitive it might as well have been magic. When the Devourer flagship's reactor exploded, taking half their fleet command structure with it, the remaining enemy ships began to retreat. They had superior technology, superior numbers, and superior firepower. But they had never learned to fight the kind of war that humans had been perfecting since they first picked up rocks and decided to throw them at their enemies. As the Devourer fleet limped away from the asteroid field, Admiral Rodriguez opened communications with Admiral Kethvar. The Veltar commander's voice carried something that hadn't been heard in his species for 3 centuries, hope mixed with awe. Admiral Rodriguez, your tactics are unprecedented. How do you train your people to fight with such chaos? Rodriguez looked out at his scattered fleet, already regrouping for the next engagement, and smiled. We don't train them to fight with chaos, Admiral. We train them to create it. The war changed after the Battle of the Outer Moons. Word spread through the Devourer Empire that their seemingly unstoppable advance had been halted by a species that fought unlike anything they had ever encountered. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Devourers began to experience something they had forgotten existed: fear. Captain Vasquez received new orders a week after the asteroid battle. Intelligence gathered from captured Devourer ships had revealed the location of their primary staging area, a massive ship construction facility built around a dying star. The facility produced the world-killer vessels that had destroyed 27 civilizations. Admiral Rodriguez had decided it needed to stop existing. The attack on the staging area became known as the Deep Strike, and it showcased everything that made human warfare unique. Instead of attempting to fight their way through the facility's defenses, the human fleet approached the problem like engineers rather than soldiers. They studied the construction process, identified the critical components, and then systematically destroyed the supply chain that fed the facility. Commander Lisa Chen led a series of lightning raids against the asteroid mines that provided raw materials. Her Marines didn't try to hold the installations. They simply destroyed the extraction equipment and moved on. Within days, the flow of resources to the main facility slowed to a trickle. Simultaneously, Dr. Park had made a breakthrough in understanding Devourer psychology. The captured aliens revealed that their entire society was built around the concept of inevitable victory. They had never developed contingency plans for defeat because defeat had never been a possibility. When their carefully ordered universe began to collapse, they didn't adapt. They simply tried harder to make their original plans work. This inflexibility became their downfall during the siege of the Void Fortress. The Devourers had constructed a massive defensive platform to protect their staging area, armed with weapons that could crack moons and shields that had never been penetrated. It was an impregnable fortress by any conventional measure. Humans didn't attack it conventionally. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen had developed a new variation of her intelligence-gathering technique. Instead of simply observing enemy positions, she began spoofing their communications networks, feeding false information into their command systems. The Devourer computers began receiving reports of human attacks that weren't happening, ghost fleets that didn't exist, threats that were entirely imaginary. The fortress began firing at targets that weren't there, depleting their energy reserves and revealing the locations of their weapon systems. When the real human attack finally came, the defenders were confused, exhausted, and completely unprepared for enemies who struck from directions their sensors insisted were empty. Captain Vasquez led the assault on the fortress using a tactic borrowed from the siege warfare of Earth's medieval period. Instead of trying to break through the shields, her ships simply attached themselves to the station's hull like barnacles on a ship. The fortress's weapons couldn't fire inward without destroying the station itself, and the shields were useless against enemies who were already inside the defensive perimeter. What followed was the largest boarding action in galactic history. Thousands of human marines, supported by Veltar technology specialists, fought their way through the corridors of a structure the size of a small moon. The Devourers, trapped inside their own fortress, discovered that their superior technology meant nothing in the confined spaces where human combat expertise had been refined through millennia of warfare. Sergeant Maria Santos found herself leading a mixed human Veltar squad through the fortress's command center, hunting for the installation's central computer core. The Veltar soldiers, watching her work, began to understand what made humans so effective in combat. She didn't follow a plan, she created one as she went, adapting to each new obstacle with the kind of creative problem-solving that could only come from a species that had survived by outwitting larger, stronger, faster opponents. When Santos finally reached the core and began planting demolition charges, she was confronted by the fortress commander, a massive devourer with ceremonial armor and weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The creature spoke in perfect Earth standard, its voice filled with centuries of conquest and confidence. Your species will be consumed, just as all others have been consumed. You delay the inevitable. Santos looked up from her charges and smiled. Maybe, but you'll never know, because you won't be alive to see it. The explosion that destroyed the Void Fortress could be seen from 3 star systems away. With it died the Devourer's primary construction facility and their ability to replace the losses they had suffered. But more importantly, something else died with that explosion: the myth of Devourer invincibility. News of the fortress's destruction spread through the galaxy faster than light. Species that had hidden for centuries began to emerge from their shelters. Civilizations that had given up hope began to resist. The Devourer Empire, which had expanded unchecked for millennia, suddenly found itself fighting on dozens of fronts against enemies who had learned from human tactics. Admiral Kethvar met with Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Veltar flagship 3 days after the deep strike. The alien commander's normally rigid posture had relaxed, and when he spoke, his voice carried something that sounded almost human, exhausted relief mixed with genuine gratitude. "Your species has given us something we thought we had lost forever," Kethvar said. "You have given us a future, but I must ask, why? Why did you cross nearly 1,000 light years to help strangers?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. Around them, the combined human Veltar fleet prepared for what would likely be the final battle of the war, a direct assault on the Devourer homeworld itself. Earth's finest soldiers worked alongside beings whose technology could reshape reality, all united in a common cause. "Because that's what humans do," Rodriguez finally answered. "Someone sent out a call for help, and we heard it. That's reason enough." The Battle of the Devourer homeworld lasted for 3 days and became the template for what galactic civilizations would later call the human doctrine. The principle that no enemy, regardless of technological superiority, was unbeatable if you were willing to fight in ways they couldn't predict or counter. The Devourers had turned their homeworld into a fortress beyond imagination. The planet itself was protected by orbital rings of weapons platforms, each one capable of sterilizing a continent. The system was surrounded by automated defense networks that had never been penetrated. It was the ultimate expression of Devourer military engineering, beautiful, efficient, and absolutely deadly. It was also exactly the kind of target that humans specialized in destroying. Dr. Park had spent weeks studying captured devourer technology and had made a disturbing discovery. The automated defense systems weren't just powerful, they were intelligent. They learned from each attack and adapted their responses accordingly. Any conventional assault would face defenses that got stronger with each wave. The solution came from an unexpected source: Commander Lisa Chen's 8-year-old daughter Emily, who had been corresponding with her mother via quantum communication throughout the campaign. During one conversation, Emily mentioned a game she was playing where the only way to win was to teach the computer to defeat itself. The idea was so simple it was brilliant. Instead of attacking the devourer defenses directly, the human fleet would feed them information about human tactics. False information. They would deliberately lose a series of small engagements, allowing the automated systems to learn and adapt to counter techniques that humans weren't actually using. Captain Vasquez led the deception campaign, commanding sacrifice fleets that fought using deliberately flawed tactics. Her ships were destroyed in carefully choreographed defeats that taught the devourer computers exactly the wrong lessons about human warfare. The AI systems, designed to learn and adapt, became progressively better at countering strategies that no human commander would ever actually use. When the real assault began, the devourer defenses were perfectly prepared for an enemy that didn't exist. Their weapons targeted formations that humans never used, their shields were configured to stop attacks that never came, and their tactical computers were running scenarios that had no connection to reality. The human fleet struck like lightning, using tactics so basic they predated spaceflight: concentrated firepower, rapid movement, and coordinated assault. The sophisticated devourer defenses, trained to counter elaborate strategies, were helpless against an enemy that simply flew straight at them and started shooting. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, now commanding a squadron of Veltar stealth ships equipped with human weapons, penetrated the inner system and began broadcasting directly into the devourer communication networks. But instead of spreading disinformation, she transmitted something that no devourer had ever heard before: the sound of their own people surrendering. The psychological effect was devastating. The devourers had built their entire civilization around the concept of inevitable victory. The idea that their own kind could choose defeat over death, that surrender was even possible, shattered their collective worldview in ways that no weapon ever could. When the combined human Veltar fleet finally reached the devourer homeworld, they found a species in chaos. Their government had collapsed, their military was in retreat, and their population was experiencing something unprecedented in their history: the realization that they could lose. The surrender negotiations took place on neutral ground. A space station hastily constructed by Veltar engineers and equipped with human-designed security systems. Admiral Rodriguez found himself sitting across from beings who had conquered 27 worlds. Listening to them try to understand how their empire had fallen to a species that had only learned about their existence a few months earlier. "Your tactics make no sense," the lead devourer negotiator insisted. "You sacrifice efficiency for adaptability. You choose chaos over order. You fight like humans," Rodriguez finished. "We fight like humans, and apparently that's enough." The peace treaty that ended the Devourer War established the principle that would reshape galactic civilization: the right of all species to defend themselves and others against aggression, regardless of technological disparity. The Devourers agreed to reparations and the establishment of neutral zones to protect the species they had previously conquered. But the real victory wasn't written in the treaty. It was written in the eyes of the Veltar children, who could now look up at the stars without fear, in the refugee populations returning to rebuild their worlds, in the dozens of species that emerged from hiding to reclaim their place in the galaxy. 6 months after the first distress signal had crossed the stars, Lieutenant Sarah Chen found herself back at the Titan Deep Space Communications Center, monitoring the same frequencies where the war had begun. But now, instead of desperate pleas for help, the channels carried something entirely different. Messages of hope, plans for rebuilding, and most importantly, offers of mutual assistance between species that had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach. No one had to face the darkness alone. The stars were full of voices now, and they were all saying the same thing, that somewhere in the vast galaxy, there were people who would answer when you called for help. There were people who would cross impossible distances to stand beside you when the darkness came. There were people who would fight for strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. There were humans,